1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah, that's good, I think. Yeah. Okay, so I'll post this to the S3S first, and then we'll send it to Susan.
Okay, thank you. Hi. Thank you.
I think we're all set up. I sent it to her by Messenger, Facebook Messenger.
I'll just send a quick email reminding them, here, 20 minutes.
I was way more nervous this time.
Yeah.
Like, I remember last year for the exam. Oh, I wasn't this nervous. I'm just way more nervous this time. I don't know why. It's like my stomach is just.
Just think I'm in a bathtub of warm water. Everyone's going to make me feel just like I'm in a bathtub of warm water. That's what I think about. Because you're among friends.
Yeah.
Even the committee.
Hope so.
Doesn't sound like you're good.
I mean, you know, like we talked about it. There's just like, I guess that's why I'm like nervous, because it kind of scares me.
Is there something we can prop that up with?
This is a dumb little thing.
Dumb little thing.
Dumb little thing. It has a broken leg.
Oh, I know how it feels right now. It looks lovely. Thank you. So you've been here a week? 2 weeks?
A week.
A week. Yeah.
Last Sunday.
Yeah.
I'm tired.
Yes. We'll all get a lot more rest. Dan's is on Friday, and then after that, I think we're all going to rest for a while.
Relax a bit. Yeah.
I'm going to be attending the ones next week, but I don't have any responsibilities. That's lovely.
You have all of the stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I checked Barbara and she was like, somebody already came and got the microphone. Okay.
Committee.
Yeah.
Committee.
These three are the committee.
This makes sense. Yeah. They look a lot more official then.
No, they just have one extra piece of paper.
Probably looking at you a lot and that side of the room, like the middle section. I don't think I can make eye contact with you.
You're good.
Yeah.
That'll be good.
Yes, yeah. That's my mom, yes. She's my mom.
I'm Victoria. Nice to meet you. We'll see you Saturday night too. For
Yes.
April.
Yeah.
Yes. We're excited about that.
We're also talking about a dinner Friday night for me, Dan, and Josh.
Okay, cool. Yeah. It is the time to celebrate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Assuming that there's something to celebrate.
my
Oh my
goodness.
god. Oh my god.
That's true. I'm like, oh God.
We've only had one student who did not pass their exams. Or actually that was the exams. I don't think we've ever had anybody not pass the defense.
Okay.
Okay. I hope we won't be the first
Rock
ones.
stars anyway. So
Right.
There's also the possibility that we will the first ones in the history of our city. It's like everybody will know our name.
make sure everybody remembers who I am. I mean, no, one way to go about it.
You need a glass of wine.
I need a bottle of wine. It's like the entire bottle.
It's only 9:45.
Okay.
Oh, are we live?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
What time is it?
It is 9:45.
9:45.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
you're good.
What we have to be nervous about is the committee.
I know. Where are they?
I know Victor will be here, but maybe I should text him just
Just so you
for
know.
grins.
I remember Jim was like really late the last
Well, I've been copying his secretary on everything
I ended up
because she put it on his calendar. And
Yeah.
GSG shirts.
Thank you, nice to
All
Yes, sir, it's
extra
right there.
large, but-
Hi.
This. Oh, cool.
I'm warm. But I'm really.
Like the serve.
I'm hot. I'm gonna.
I know. Let me see if I can.
I mean, it's like.
Turn down the thermostat, so maybe that will.
Also, maybe that I'm really nervous right now. Like my face is like burning. I feel like fire coming out of my ears or something.
Well, you look completely put together. Yeah. So.
Yeah, he was like, so do this.
So now you're going to El Paso on the 20th,
The 19th.
19th.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
They called me. They said that they have extra money and
That's wonderful.
they would love to have me. And that's the weekend. They have a graduate symposium. That's why, like,
Oh,
they were like,
that's
it would be great if you can make it that weekend so you
Yeah.
can meet more people.
Awesome.
They also said, like, we would also wanna, like, while you're here, like, we will help you to look for like, housing and everything. So that was nice.
Well, so on the 19th, before you leave,
Yeah.
you have to get your final manuscript to the grad school. We'll get the form by then too, but
I thought the due date for the final manuscript was the 26th.
I really think I need to.
That's what the website said.
yeah, I think you're right. But
An
the
hour won't burn.
the form is the 19th.
The form is the 19th.
Look.
I just don't feel like no, just I should go back in. It's just the feeling of being disgusted. There's something to do.
Oh, Victor said. Hi.
I texted you, but I knew I
Do I get to
shouldn't.
sit here?
Yes, you do. The other two are gonna sit there. How are you?
I got lots of sleep last night.
I wish I had. I was up and down.
Did you get some sleep?
Good weird dreams. A lot of dreams.
Weird dreams.
Yeah. A lot of weird dreams.
Oh, my God.
Right. Right. So the form is due the 19th, but you submit the manuscript by the 26th for format approval, and then anything you make after that are changes, and that all has to be completed by May the 3rd. So
Okay.
you're good. You're right. And that, but before you leave, since you'll be gone some of that time, we have to work on some minor things like the author's name before.
I've been actually kind of
Oh, you've been working on that?
a little bit.
Okay.
I actually even corrected the opening
Oh,
code.
the
So like,
epigraphs.
yeah, I formatted like right line down, changed the font so that they were.
And get it all in the shape of the cover page and acknowledgements and
Yeah.
abstract.
Pagination requirements are a little.
Yeah, they're very strict.
I'm like, why?
I don't know. You
The
just have to do it.
introduction has to be in a different way.
Yeah, that has to be well, your introduction,
Actually.
yeah, is separate from chapter 1. So it's a long introduction. It's going to have Roman numerals.
I know. Now I regret that.
It's fine.
I should have called it chapter 1 instead of introduction.
Oh, well. So that's just minor stuff. It's just going to be tedious to deal with the little stuff like that. You've ordered your cap and gown?
I'm gonna rent it.
I mean, you've rented it?
No, not yet. Tomorrow. The
When's the
13th
deadline?
is 13th.
Okay, you know that. Okay.
Can you pick me up
Pick you up.
for graduation?
Oh, yeah.
Where is it gonna be? We don't know.
Oh. Unless they get rid of the bats, they'll have to change it.
Oh, they can't get rid of those bats. We get them there.
Oh, that's committee.
Committee.
Oh, sorry.
No, no,
That's
that's
okay.
fine.
Anyway,
We don't, yeah, we're a standby right now. Thank you. Don't have to worry about that.
Hi, nice to see you again. Oh, you look beautiful. Oh, thank goodness. Where should I sit? I don't want
Like
to
you
be
can sit here, anywhere.
Okay. Okay.
we're on that side.
Is it okay? Is this okay?
This would be great. This might be in front of the camera. I don't know.
Okay.
It's kind of a wonky chair with the arm missing.
Am I okay?
No, you're great.
Okay, I don't want to be in anyone's way.
This is my favorite place for you to be.
I'm nervous when there's members outside the small.
What time is it?
9:52.
Where are these cats?
You don't know where. I just emailed them all
Love.
to remind them.
Love those committee members that make you just shake in your boots.
Got that.
Yeah.
You had to do that once. Are you gonna come? Victor.
Over on that side.
How are you?
Should I rearrange this? I feel like I'm
No.
gonna be turning my back to the other side.
You have to, well, if you want to turn it
Like a little,
like just perpendicular, even with the table. There you go.
is this okay?
Yeah.
I feel like this is better.
Should I sit over there?
Where you want? You can sit over there.
This is going to be in front of the camera, but
Okay.
there are seats back there, and there are places on the couch, and so just sit at the table.
I want to be able to, yeah.
Oh, it's one of those kind of days, huh?
Oh, yeah.
It's a double shot
Double
espresso.
shot. It's a double shot day.
Cynthia, your earrings,
Thank you.
they're amazing.
Oh, thank you. My guilty pleasure.
Yeah. It's,
Just doing this jewelry thing. It's a lot of fun.
I love jewelry too.
I found I have certain people in Norway that I'm looking for, certain vintage pieces, and when I find one that's rare that's gone on sale, and I found one it's coming today.
Do you look on eBay or?
I'm looking at auctions in Sweden and
Oh my gosh.
Norway and eBay and Etsy and quite a few places.
Nice.
Constantly scrolling because you never know when they're going to pop up
Uh-huh.
and be available.
Yeah.
And I have my certain limits on how much I pay for them because eventually I might sell them, but I don't want to.
Right.
And these I love.
Yeah. They remind me sort of like a bass clap, something like that, you know what I mean? Sort of a musical.
It's a woman.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'd really be happier if this was
I was kind of overwhelmed by the jewelry in Asheville when Rick and I went there. It's so beautiful. I got this moon,
Oh,
and I have a thing about moons.
lunar.
Yeah.
I have a friend in Fort Worth who, she has some historian in England that does videos about ancient history,
Hmm.
and she wears this. It's a half moon, but it's upside down.
Hmm. Oh, that's the horn.
Yes,
That's a really
the double
popular.
horn.
I love that too.
And so she just said, I've got to show you this video. This one has this thing. Well, I found.
Is it gold?
I don't know. It's ancient. I'm sure she got it,
Okay.
in all, whatever she works in. But I tried to zoom in and see it because my friend really wanted it.
Oh yeah, me too.
I found,
It's on my birthday list.
I didn't find an ancient Greek one or
Mhm.
anything, but I found one that's, because it crosses lots of cultures.
Yeah.
I found one that's Finnish, and it has a moose heads on the end of it, or elk heads or something.
This is the one that I've been eyeing.
Yes, it's exactly like.
And Nosoma is it's a UK brand, but
Yeah.
they do ship to the United States.
Oh,
They're not cheap, but they're actually
yeah,
this is the way it looks.
Yep. that's it. That's exactly.
I want one.
Can I see that again?
Well, if you're willing to go,
My birthday's in 2 days, Victor.
if you're willing to go bronze and vintage, I can find you some.
Yeah.
But they're not shiny and gold.
I'm not like I'm drawn
Just
to
love
it.
the-
Yeah. I guess I'm just drawn to it.
Did you just say your birthday's in 2 days?
It is.
So is mine.
And so is Shauna's.
Camille, you, April, and Shauna all share a birthday?
Oh my gosh, we're all
What a
Aries
special
on the
day.
same day.
Special.
Yours is on
Yeah,
Sunday.
it's a great day.
I turned 50.
Oh, I turned 39. It's my last year in the 30s.
Just, it just gets so
Yeah.
weird.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah,
It's a milestone.
I know, I'm officially 18.
So we have table of contents, which might help with
Makes it a
pagination.
little easier this way.
That is-
I love how she did this. Each chapter on this story map.
Mhm, Pretty cool.
On campus, if he has one.
Okay. Amazing.
Hello.
Okay.
Okay, we're all set. Yay.
Should I wait?
Yeah, let's give it one more minute because we have maybe other people. Good. How are you? She printed out a table of contents to help with it
Thanks.
because I didn't print copies and mine's on a PDF file. Well, actually, I think we'll just go ahead and get started. So, welcome. Everybody knows, most everybody here, except that we have the honor of having Edith's mother here and from Turkey. So we're very happy that you could come all that way. And our committee, Ahmed Vine from History and Jim Spencer from the College's Associate Dean, and Victor Vitanza. So Edith's going to speak to us for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have about 30 minutes for the public question and answer period, and the committee will kind of sit on our hands while we wait for that to happen, and then we will excuse the public at 11, and we'll confer and have a discussion, conversation with Edith. Take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming this morning. It really means a lot. It's been a long process, so it's nice to have support and smiling faces. So thank you so much. I would like to start by painting a mental image for you. Imagine yourselves in the middle of a desert and consider the sand covering the ground as your writing space. Every stroke of your pen on the sand uncovers almost infinite layers of connections that you can neither predict to make nor control. And this chaos is what shapes your writing. Writing with Middle East has been a mapping of these lines drawn on the sand that neither arrive to an end nor do they have a beginning. A rhizomatic mapping is the Luz and Guattari ride that, quote, has no beginning or end, proceeding from the middle, through the middle, coming and going rather than starting and finishing, end quote. Writing with Middle East has been a mapping that always starts in the middle, which responds to the chance of space that Lori Massey understands as, quote, the element of surprise, and chaos, the unexpected, the other, end quote. I always return to the summer of 2016. That's when I saw how the Navy officers forcefully grabbed the paperless and stateless refugees from an inflatable boat on the shores of my hometown. The shores that I touched, felt, and walked since I was a little girl, which changed the meaning of that space for me. Now, the shores of my childhood come with a memory image of desperation and degradation of human life and its value, the materialization of suppressive power in its most disturbing form. Responding to this memory space offered me an unexpected image that I could not bear to remember. The image of the 3-year-old Syrian boy, Aylan Kurdi, whose little body washed up to the shores of Bodrum, Turkey. Him and his family were trying to get to Greece and from there to Europe to start a new life away from war and death. Aylan, like many other boat people, as Cynthia Haynes gently uses the term with delicate care, was running away from the crude empiricism of the ground logic driven by the war machine. Aylan was one of these boats because his family hoped to find freedom, security, and a promise for a better future for him, so that his little body could grow up and have a meaningful existence in the world. However, keeping our ground in the ground that we strongly desire to territorialize and own was apparently more important than Aylan. Writing with Middle East has been me listening to the stories of many other boat people like Aylan, who have been suffering from the strong emotional impacts of displacement, which Edward Casey diagnoses as called homesickness, disorientation, depression, and desolation. The condition of homesickness, which, as Cynthia Haynes explains, quote, is not about missing home. It is about the sickness called homeland security and our rhetorical task of addressing it in an age of perpetual conflict. We will never know why when it comes to the conflict and unspeakable violence, even though it seduces us into believing there's an answer on the other side of why, end quote. The extensively totalized image of the Middle East on the global map then shows us a geography suffering from the homesickness without ever knowing why, which became a call I've been receiving from this lost geography, a call from a no place, doomed by our own fear of the other. This is a call from the displaced people who are either fleeing their homes or becoming homeless without actually leaving what's left of home. People who become part of another state as a result of constantly changing borders. They are always in an in-transit state, a non-place, which Judith Butler describes as, quote, a life steeped in power, unquote, which is the underlying mechanism that continuously pushes the Middle East into the margins of the global map. I came to understand this mechanical system through Deleuze-Guattari's tree model, which is rooted in the consciousness of the modern Western civilization and its experience of forming a unified globe. According to Dennis Cosgrove, the contemporary experience of globalization is, quote, Western in its origins and integrated into the process of modernization, through which the very idea of the West has been differentiated on a single global surface, end quote. And this experience, as John Agnew argues, has never been, quote, a composition of equal and pacific elements, but a hierarchy of places, that of a dichotomous global West and East, in which the former is seen as the total opposite, and hence the definitive standard for the latter, end quote. This system has produced what Doreen Massey defines as the aspatial image of globalization, in which, quote, the essential multiplicities of spatial are denied, end quote. This aspatial image, Deleuze-Guattari write, is, quote, a sad image of thought that is forever imitating the multiple on the basis of centered or segmented higher unity, end quote. To me, this sad image embodies itself in those empty boats and echoes the Orient, and as Edward Said writes, it's, quote, disturbingly familiar ideas about flogging or death, or extended punishment being required when they misbehaved or became rebellious, because they mainly understood force or violence best. They were not like us, and for that reason, deserve to be ruled. And I start in the Middle East, on a boat offshore, flying over the cruel empiricism of the ground logic. I follow the disorienting lines on the sand, and this is where I get lost. Because the lines on the sand, the rules of the Western tree that shaped and reshaped the Middle East throughout the 20th century, are also rhizomatic formations, the unique relationship between the roots of the tree and the rhizome, and how they need one another to start again. So I decided to follow what this map that I have today is offering me. So I have a Middle East that has always been a geopolitical importance due to its tricontinental location as global crossroads, its access to crucial transportation routes and petroleum reserves. Sorry. I have a Middle East that also has been the focus of global attention due to escalating conflicts in the region that have resulted in war, violence, and terrorism. Then there's the Middle East that was defined in the context of the broader Eastern question and its colonial project. Also, the Middle East that was reinvented under the Europe's image of primitive Orient, which was a subject to a game to be played, a game to win. There is also a Middle East that was re-narrated in the context of the Middle Eastern question, that emerged from the earlier Eastern question and the ghost of the Oriental image. This is the Middle East that was reconstructed by the imperial agenda and colonial consciousness of the multipolar gaze of the European powers during the early 20th century. The modern Middle East that was formed after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. A Middle East that was a product of the Western cartography, and the history of this colonial mapping has been a history, as Karen Piper writes, quote, of quoting the enemy, making a them and us that can be defended with a clear border. It has been a history of pushing them out of territory that is considered ours, denying their existence, deleting their maps, drawing lines in the sand. And this Middle East eventually gave birth to the formation of mandate states in the region during the post-World War I period. Brian Harley indicates that owning the map always meant owning the land, and by reconstructing the map of the Middle East, the multipolar colonial gaze of the European powers accomplished gaining imperial ownership over the region. The maps of the Middle East, primarily produced in the imperial European context during the first half of the 20th century, do not present the Middle East with a terrorist image, narrated within the problematic discourse of political Islam. However, these maps introduce us to a Middle East that was produced to be weak, lacking proper governing skills, which is why it needed to be ruled under a mandate system. This is the Middle East that is the bastard child of the Europe's Oriental image, and its only future is existing as the unwanted other in a land of turmoil, which prepared yet another ground logic to formulate itself as the century follows. Just a reminder that always catches me off guard. Aylan is still gone, and we are still doomed by our own fear of the other. Post-World War II marked a transition process with decolonization and the Arab nationalism movement for the region. Now we have a Middle East that defined itself with a rhizomatic movement of resistance against the old mandate structure of the European powers. During this period, the struggle for the new independent nation states was a twofold identity crisis. The first one was how the individual national identities of the new independent states did cross the territorial borders of the borders the European powers had set, because these new nation states were forming their identities in their historical spatial regions of their pre-modern roots. Distinction paths that made unification that Pan-Arabism envisioned difficult. The second was how the non-Arab and non-Muslim identities were being alienated under the image of the Arab homeland, due to how this cartographic vision focused on unifying all Arab-speaking people with a strong connection to Islamic solidarity. While the Arab-speaking people included non-Arab ethnic groups in the region, it definitely excluded non-Muslims, in addition to still emphasizing the Arab identity, which caused internal resentment among non-Arab ethnic groups across the borders of the new Middle East. What we have at this point is a Middle East that internalized the Europe's colonizer consciousness to fight against the European subjugation. A Middle East that failed to form a meaningful existence for its identity and remained as a problematic other the West needed to save. Another reminder, Ireland is still gone. The displaced people of the Middle East are still trying to survive and escape war, and we are still doomed by our own fear of the other. On a broader level, the failed rhizomatic movement of the decolonization period resulted in providing a logical reasoning for external interventions to intensify during the Cold War period. Middle East's failure to properly implement democratic nation-state structures contributed to its already existing incompetent image of self-governance, which became a reason for the United States and Soviet Russia, the new great powers of the changing world order, to save the Middle East. This resulted in the reconstruction of the Middle East around the enemy and victim images. The World War II alliance of the US and Soviet Russia that fought against one of the most horrifying enemies in the world history, the Nazi Germany, was over by the early 1950s, which marks the approximate beginning of the bipolar Cold War rivalry. The primary agenda for the new great powers of the new world order was to prevent another catastrophe like World War II ever happening again, which resulted in the need to define who the new enemy was. Within the broader Cold War tension, for the Soviet Russia, the enemy was the US imperialism that needed to be kept out from the Middle East. For the US, the communist Soviet Russia was the enemy that needed to be prevented from turning the Middle East to another communist area. In this context, the secular nationalist movement supported by the Soviet Russia in the Middle East became the enemies of the US, and for the Soviet Russia, the conservative and imperial ideology of the political Islam supported by the US in the Middle East was the enemy. The first layer of internalization of these enemy and victim images took place in the context of how the progressive national movements and the conservative ideologies of political Islam also consider one another as the evil enemy and aimed at saving the Middle East from Middle East. In the Middle Eastern front, US took all means necessary to win the power game of the Cold War period. Rashid Khalidi highlights a crucial point, which might come as a surprise, especially considering the current demonization of Islam in the American context. But during the Cold War, quote, Islam as an ideological tool thus proved useful to the United States and its allies among the conservative forces in the Arab and Islamic worlds, end quote, including the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan during the late 70s, as Mahmoud Mamdani indicates. Quote, which seemed largely on the defensive in the face of the Soviet-backed progressive Arab regimes, end quote. As the Cold War progressed, the US became stronger with its hidden interest in the region's oil resources and strategic military locations, coupled with supporting the formation of a stronger Israeli state. With the fall of the Soviet Russia, the US filled a power vacuum and changed its political policy in the region, which meant reducing its support for political Islam. Especially the growing support for Israel resulted in a strong resentment among many of the conservative Islamic Arab regimes due to the violent displacement of the Palestinian people. According to Mamdani, quote, the result of an alliance gone sour, 9/11 needs to be understood first and foremost as the unfinished business of the Cold War, end quote. There is also a Middle East defined by the second level of internalization of the enemy and victim images that also took place under the bipolar gaze of the Cold War period. This internalization in the region's cartographic consciousness is evident in the Arab-Israeli conflict and the silenced Palestine question. Israel's alienating rhetorical reinvention of its enemy image is a violent exercise of power which disposed the Palestinian nation into the spaceless memory of the Holocaust. Dagloni reports that, quote, in the first decades of Israel's existence, Palestinians were openly labeled as anti-Semites by Israeli leaders. For example, the symbol of the Holocaust, one of the greatest evils of humanity, has been taken out of its historical context and repeatedly been projected at the Palestinians, who thus are presented as being capable of repeating what the Nazis did, if not harshly prevented by Israel from so doing, end quote. For Israel, establishing a strong national ownership in its promised homeland was one of the central rhetorical moves in reinventing its national identity, which resulted in dehumanizing the landscape with Palestinian inhabitants, deleting them from their maps, yet still keeping them at a safe distance in a no man's land. In this context, the national symbols that define Israeli identity in the experience of the Holocaust, which are fear, victimization, security, the soldier, collectivization, and separation, which Dagloni explains these are the primary national identity symbols for Israel. They became central to cartographic invention of Israel's homeland and its socio-spatial identity. Cartographic narration of the Israeli homeland resulted in an invisible presence of the Palestinian people as the enemy beyond the borders, almost out of sight, with a strong presence of being a threat to the Israeli nation. This fear of the enemy and the strong desire to keep Israel safe with a strong soldier image that initiates Israel's strong and masculine identity is evident in how Israel has been responding to the Palestinian resistance to the Israeli occupation. Lonin indicates that when a terrorist, quote, when a terrorist activity occurs in Israel, boundaries are placed on the occupied territories. Politicians employ the security concept as legitimization. Thus, it is impossible to argue that closing the territories leads to a halt in terrorism. On the contrary, it often leads to acts of revenge by Palestinian extremists. It has other effects, however. Firstly, it is collective punishment, as the flow of capital into Palestine society is severely damaged. Secondly, and more importantly, it is a temporary measure against fear, simply reducing the Palestinian presence in Israeli streets. This collective punishment is a reflection of the collective identity of Israel. A totalization under one land and one national image continuously reproducing its victimization, and as a result, its strong will to secure and protect its homeland under the close surveillance of Homeland Security. Today, the Israeli government continues to delete the existence of homesick Palestine from its map. The Israeli government's efforts to implement a de facto annexation of Palestinian people is an indication of how Israel continues to reconstruct its national homeland in alignment with its national identity, Israeli homeland for Israeli Jewish state. Territorial ownership continues to be one of the primary denominators in defining Israel as a state only for Jewish people, which displaces Palestine into the in-transit condition wherein they, as Judith Butler writes, quote, become effectively stateless. Yet, they still remain under the control of the state power. This way, they are without a legal protection, but in no way relegated to a bare life, end quote. As the question of Palestine in the context of Arab-Israeli conflict became an unresolvable question, on a broader level, the Middle Eastern question gained a new cartographic reality with the 9/11 terrorist attacks. In reconstructing the broader Middle Eastern problem in the post-9/11 world, the war on terror discourse established a zero-tolerance policy against any possible terrorist threats. While I do not support any violent action, and I do believe that terrorism is an act that deserves a zero tolerance, the problem at hand is not necessarily about how to deal with the violent and inhumane consequences of terrorism when it comes to the popular representation of Middle East today. The war on terror discourse resulted in extensively totalizing Middle East under the enemy image of terrorist Muslims. And this extensive totalization has been functioning as a collective punishment due to the unjust profiling of all Muslims as terrorists. Mahmoud Mamdani indicates that the war on terrorism discourse called, quote, for a war to the finish in the name of justice, but understand justice as revenge. And it has proceeded by dishing out collective punishment with callous disregard for either collateral damage or legitimate grievances. End quote. The Palestine problem within the current context of the Israeli-Palestine conflict has been receiving a similar response from the Israeli government. The zero tolerance for any terrorist activity and collectively punishing the Palestinian people have been central to how the Israeli government has been dealing with the Palestinian problem, just like how the US has been dealing with its Middle Eastern problem. Now, we have an overall image. An image that is a product of a cumulative process of violent reproductions throughout the 20th century in the context of chaos, war, and terror. A Middle East that always remains as a non-Western other on the global map of the West-East dichotomy. A Middle East that has been shaped by the continuing external interventions of the Western powers and internal power centers that totalized the region, which were, according to Khalidi, quote, ideologically opposed to democracy in any form, and all of which tended to undermine democratic regimes whenever these obstructed their economic or strategic interests, end quote. The ideological oppositions of both Western powers and the internal power centers within the Middle East to any democratic regime constructed and fixed the region as the unresolvable problem that the West, primarily, today the US, always has to be fixed. The eternal question of the Middle Eastern problem leaves almost no room for any alternative question, response, and or representation. The aspecial image of this question is the reason that island is still gone, is the reason that we are still doomed by our own fear of the other. Yet this time, this fear is the fear of a new image, the image of new heroes, the brave woman of Middle East. And once again, I start in the middle, follow the lines on the sand, and respond to the chants of Middle East. Mapping the Middle East in this project has become, on one level, an unconscious writing about the women of the region. Today, the demonic stereotype to Muslim image is being challenged by the Middle Eastern woman. Brave women in Turkey taught me a lesson by telling me their stories, their right and freedom to wear a headscarf, not because they are forced to, but because they choose to. The brave women in Iran showed me that they have the courage to remove their headscarves as a reaction to the oppressive regime in Iran that has been forcing them to be the proper Muslim woman, that is written as a counter-image to the Western woman. These women stand up to be who they are. They fight for their own beings as Muslim women, and they refuse to be the victims of the epistemic violence of categorization that stabilizes and constitutes them as the other. They are mothers, sisters, cousins, and daughters whose fathers shed tears and write letters for them while they're in prison, like the 16-year-old Palestinian Ahid Tamimi, because they're not scared to write themselves and tell their stories. I have been writing with Ahed, the girl with the golden hair, since her arrest after she slapped an Israeli soldier due to her strong desire to protect his home and family in December 2017. Not only Ahed, but also her mother Neriman are sentenced to 8 months in prison by the Israeli court in late March 2018. For every day Ahed will spend in prison, she is also going to be paying approximately $1,400 to the Israeli government. Ahed and many other young girls like her are fighting for the right of not to fear being killed or severely injured or arrested as they play in their homes, their backyards. They are raising their voices not to be afraid as they walk home from school. They are resisting the occupation, the war, the violence, so that they are not forced to leave the land they know as home. They are writing their own stories so that they can save many other children who were condemned to be refugees and lost their lives on the shores far away from home like Aylan. They refuse to be the enemy or the victim, and they certainly do not let anyone domesticate them. They are writing in the Middle East, and I am writing with them. Ahed, as a real Wonder Woman, gives me hope to save kids like Aylan from the bare life of displacement. Today, the Middle East woman is writing herself and telling stories about the violation of women's rights and lack of democracy across the region from different perspectives. The women of Middle East tell us that the chaos, disorder, and war in the region is not because of Islam. It is the governments and their political ideologies that always seek an advantage to gain power in the global arena of geopolitical relations. The governments of both West and Middle East make decisions at the expense of people's lives and freedom. The women of Middle East are telling us that we cannot continue to keep attacking the West or the Middle East for all the chaos and violence, because what needs to matter should be the lives, voices, needs, and rights of the people who are of and from these geographies of cultures. The question of the Middle East should be a question of how to restore faith in humanity. And the problem we need to deal with should be the problem of human rights, social justice, and equality. Today, the Middle East is writing herself, and I am writing with her. And I hope that you will write with me, with the brave women of Middle East, as part of this project. Thank you. Thank you.
It's an extra long applause for a wonderful talk. So now we can open it up for discussion, comments, and questions.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, your work is amazing. Thank you for this wonderful talk. I really like it. I was just wondering if you address the current geopolitical situation within Middle East, especially after the resurgence of Shia-Sunni conflict in the wake of the recent Saudi-Yemen conflict.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so because there are many internal divisions and conflicts within the area of Middle East, and how do you think those conflicts and those internal divisions, or maybe one can say those concepts of internal ethnic, affect the broader binary of East versus West? So
That's an excellent question, and that's one of the decisions that I had to make as I was working on this project. Because one thing, like after a couple discussions with Omid, one thing that we decided was that me looking at the historical context and make connections to the current conditions. But just looking at the entire 20th century, there are all like many different layers, many different struggles, many different events that shaped and reshaped and changed the meaning and course of the history for Middle East for different groups within the region as well. So that was a decision that I needed to make, that I need to focus on. I need to remain on a more global level to understand after working with different issues, I came to a conclusion that if I were able to have a better understanding of this global relationship, that will probably help me to have a better understanding in terms of how to look into the internal relationship. So that was one thing. And with the Saudi and Yemen, like more current conflicts, I primarily wrote everything to the invasion of Iraq, 9/11, post 9/11 world, and mostly focus on the Israel-Palestine conflict within the more contemporary issues in the region. I needed to kind of have a more, I needed to narrow my focus in terms of which issue that I needed to focus on more currently. Otherwise, it was definitely kind of getting out of hand, which I needed to keep it under control. But those are all the things that are important. Like I've been following the news a lot, and one can definitely, especially having establishing that kind of a global understanding, one can definitely see the internal connections and how their internal connections have an impact on the external connections. And this is why, like, we just launched this crowdsourcing map with a hope that I'm going to be like sharing this on social media as well, with a hope that people who participate in the project, that any news, any kind of different representations that I don't have access, which was another issue in the project, like being able to have access to internal representations, internal news, either due to not having permission or due to, well, not speaking many of the languages being spoken in the Middle East. So I'm hoping that this kind of participatory mapping will help me to get a much better understanding of those internal conflicts. Probably more contemporary, but you never know, like hopefully people are gonna be participating. And one of my hopes is that more historical conflicts, more historical representations from it and how those stories are being written, how those histories are being told in the region. If through this participatory mapping, if I can get access to those, that will definitely change the future course of this project, which I hope that it will be, it will be very helpful and beneficial. That's one of the things that at this point, I want to explore more. Thank you.
Just one more comment, or rather a compliment. I really like your presentation. I mean, your research, how you end your work with the standpoint of a female Eastern woman voice. And I really like, the showing of image of Laura Bush, because I remember the Laura Bush feminist school of thought became pretty popular in Western media for saving Eastern women. So I like the way you end your research.
I think when we are, this is just the one lens to put on, which is like a framework that I put together. So definitely my choice, how to read Middle East. So my experience as a Muslim woman within the current political climate definitely started to have an impact on the project. By no means I'm not saying that is the only way. By no means I'm saying that Muslim women are the only ones who are doing something. That's obviously not true. But those experiences are the ones that spoke to me the most. So, but thank you. Enjoyed it. Yes.
This is amazing.
Thank you.
Just profound. So it's been awesome to see how your thoughts have progressed over the last
Thank
couple of years. I was thinking our work is similar in the way that we both are thinking about how the others spatially represented. And I was just recently reading about sundown towns in the United States, which I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with them. They're just all white towns that were formed after that kind of brief period in the United States when we were wanting to accept African Americans and in our neighborhoods. And so one of the reasons the author of the book was talking about, one of the reasons why we began to spatialize our neighborhoods and our towns was because of imperialism. both in the United States and around the world. So I guess it's really interesting to see as you kind of trace this chronologically, to see what's happening in the Middle East and to see the attitudes, you know, of the imperialistic countries who are viewing these countries as, you know, needing, because they're just barbaric, right? But the same kind of attitudes are what, you know, what the reason why we see such segregation still in our cities and our towns and our counties around the United States. So the effects kind of just ripple all around the globe.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point, because one of the things that I recently started getting more curious about was a lot of refugees have been migrating here in the United States too. And one of my friend's friend, she works in Houston in an office, and she helps those refugees to find home. Like they welcome them, and that brought them like a thought, like their experience is not only in Middle East, like it's not like a material region, right? It's a experience like literally crossing the frontiers, literally crossing the borders, and just like you said, how that other spatial identity is internalized in the States or in other European countries is also another interesting topic to look into, which reminds me of Katrina Hall's talk as well, how the camps are being located, how they are in different locations and they are placed over there with a certain distance from the center of the cities. Definitely like the internal representation of those are interesting, unfortunate, but I guess for us scholars, definitely something to look into. Thank you. Yes.
This was amazing. I think everyone is, you know, in awe of what you've done here. It was very, everything that you're doing with the spatial representation is so fascinating. And one thing I noticed as you were speaking about the Palestinian conflict specifically, and you used a phrase where you said acts of revenge. And actually I think like that might be a more appropriate rhetorical framing of the response from Palestinians, right? Because there's so much oppression that's ongoing there, but often the way it's framed is as terrorism, right? And you addressed a lot of that problem as well. And so I guess in connection to what you were just talking about with attitudes here and attitudes about refugees and things like that, that you see a lot of these kind of imaginary rhetorical borders, and people are often framed as terrorists, right? Like that, rather than as like that they are fighting to be liberated from really oppressive things that have been in place for a long time. And so how do you deal, I think, or that's my question, is how do you deal with the rhetorical issues in places where we're not necessarily, we don't see the kind of material, spatial oppression all the time here, but we definitely see the rhetorical violence and oppression happening to people. And I know you talked a little bit about that even in your margins presentation, that kind of rhetorical violence that's done to people. And do you deal with that at all in the dissertation, or is that future stuff?
Yeah, when I was dealing with writing with the Israel-Palestine conflict, I had became really central. What she was doing, the reaction during the Palestine problem has been happening such a long time. Just it's unbearable to even read some of the news, unfortunately. But again, as a woman, I had literally spoke to me. I was drawn to her, what happened to her, and how she was treated. Like I compared that cartographic analysis, which actually was, this is the 1957 Israel National Atlas, which was produced by, or funded by, to be produced by the Israel Homeland Security, and it's Israel in pictorial maps. So I compared this cartographic analysis. This is the early stages of Israel forming its national identity. And you see, like even looking at the maps, you see like this is Israel, like this is part of Israel, and this is literally empty. Like that separation, even though there's not like a distinct border, but like the color difference, and like nothing's over there. And that's the rhetorical approach to what the Palestinians, at least to me at least, has been experiencing over there. And these kind of imaginary borders, like through policies, through different argumentations, especially recently, they've been expanding them. Like they've been displacing more and more Palestinians, and they're just saying like, no, basically. And we internally, the terrorist representation, the enemy representation, which became currently the terrorist representation of the Palestinians, that's the rhetorical understanding. And I used Doug Lunning a lot because he did a case study and he interviewed Israelis, Israeli, like he went to Israel, he interviewed a lot of people. And one thing that was really interesting that struck me was a lot of more liberal people who have the liberal mindset, more open-minded. They totally agree. He was like writing. They totally agree. Like what has been happening is unjust. Our government should stop doing that. But even with that kind of an argument, the reasoning was so that we don't have to deal with that problem anymore. So that it will be over. Like we just like let leave them alone, give them their land, so we don't have to worry about it. So this will stop. I mean, they're kind of like that's kind of the mindset. That's what he wrote, and I compared this to the current media representations, the news media representations. I picked one of the Israeli newspapers. I think there were like 4 main ones that also published in English. So I worked with opinion pieces published on ahead from a journal, a newspaper called Haaretz. I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't know. That's kind of how it's been happening in my mind. And even with that, like you see different opinions there. Like there are 1 or 2 directly says like, Ahed is not the hero that you think. Like she's a terrorist. She slapped a soldier. It's unacceptable. How we can like, and I think it was the Ministry of Education who said like she should spend her entire life in prison. And they were like writings on the wall in Israel, like, I'm sorry if this is too much, but like she should be murdered in prison and she should be raped while she's in prison. So it gets like they have absolutely no zero tolerance policy. They don't even not majority, but there is the group, there is the ideology, which is the ideology that represents the current government that thinks that way, right? So because their national identity is more important, what they need to secure. But there are also arguments like what this is happening, what Israeli government is doing right now, putting all the Jewish people around the world in danger. People are gonna get mad at us, they're gonna attack us, other Jewish people in different countries. So again, like they like we should let Ahed go. But the reasoning for because this is gonna put us in danger or this is gonna hurt our image. Or the idea of like we're ruining our historical identity. I mean, this is not Israel. We are people who suffered a lot. We need to side with Ahed, which is good. But even in that context, you can see the rhetorical use of like, this is a way for us to also save ourselves. Like even having that ownership over that experience to redefine. I mean, it's not something that this is not only evident in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Initially, I was gonna focus on the Kurdish issue. One of the main difficulties for that one that I was not able to have access to any maps or representations about that the region that we know as Kurdistan internally. We have Western maps, but I wanted to get with this national atlas. At least I was able to get a sense of like, internal representation to a certain extent. But with the Kurdistan issue, like having access was like one of the primary difficulties. And I've been trying to be honest with myself as well. The relationship between Turkey and Kurdistan is not that different with what's happening with Israel and Palestine. I heard probably I also made the same argument in terms of like is they right, we should just let them have their land and be an independent state so we don't have to deal with it. So getting to that point like wow, like I was raised like that. I was raised with a very similar mindset like everyone else in Turkey. So maybe I wasn't ready to write about it yet. It takes time to process it. But that's another case and there are many other cases that we can, like that can be written. That was a long response. Yes,
This website /story map is amazing.
thank you.
And I think by itself, it stands as like a contribution to the field, just by itself. Would you like to speak to how you pulled it together and maybe what your future plans are with it?
I have two amazing research assistants. They are with the Geographic Information Science Department at the in the Cooper Library, Providence and Ziming. They tried to make it this morning, but they couldn't, which I understand. They're also trying to graduate. But they have an amazing, so basically I started working with them at the beginning of this year. So last semester, I was not able to hire them.
Sorry.
No, I was not able to hire them because I'm a poor graduate student. But we were I was working with them through consultation. So I was meeting with them once a week and they were helping me to make maps, which I wasn't able to show today because when you write a 200-page long dissertation and try to present it in 30 minutes, you have to exclude certain things. But this is a good opportunity to show some of them. Because they were first going to make them. I mean, I told this story to Cynthia and I started working on them, but since it's consultation, the idea of writing something you don't do the work for the student, they had the same policy. So they were just showing me how to make it. But first, Zemin was yeah, send us the data. It'll take us 30 minutes. It took me 2 months. That's why I was okay, I need to do something else. This is gonna take way longer. But so these are one of the maps, actually a lot of the maps that we made, but I put them into a video. These are the British representations, and I retrieved the data from University of North Carolina. They have a Middle Eastern Center, and they have the maps that they made. So basically, we created Excel sheets for the data, and one of the difficulties was their map was not necessarily specifically showing everything within the boundaries of the countries. It was more arbitrary, coloring into certain areas, because some of the countries that they included in different time periods, they are either not countries anymore, or they became part of different countries, or they are different regions, or the naming changed. So it was kind of difficult to keep track of it. That was another reason that took a lot of time, creating a data for a spatial representation takes time. That's all I can say. And actually, I have those notes in my Excel sheets, these countries that I was unable to incorporate these in here and everything. So these were the maps that they told me how to make it, and I used ArcGIS Pro for it. And again, it took 2 months, but I made it, so I'm really proud of it. These are to give an idea. But the story maps, because then I was able to hire them at the beginning of the semester, because Clemson started doing the dissertation finishing grant, so I was able to hire them. The story maps are all basically they put the story maps together. But the way it worked, then they were really patient with me, because they kept warning me you're putting a lot of text in here, and I'm but this needs to stand on its own, because they have a different perspective to it, so it needs to be more visual. But I'm there needs to be a balance. I really needed this whole story map to stand on its own, without necessarily me saying anything about it for anyone, because I want this is public and I'm going to share it. I needed everyone to go through it and understand what the project is, so that they can come here and contribute. It's kind of the idea. But all the content, what went into it, it's all me. How it's organized, the images, which was difficult, especially with some of the things finding copyright-free representations. And I'm using a lot of the media representations, primarily Al Jazeera too, properly citing and giving links, they're active hyperlinks in there. But basically after one point, after they had all the information, all the content, I basically had to create like PowerPoints for each of the chapters. I have a Word document, notes. So they created the skeleton of it. But in the end, I basically sat with them. We put everything together step by step. In terms of design, colors, fonts, how everything needs to be ordered. This is, I guess, visually, it's more my vision, but the technical aspect, this would not come together without them. That's all I can,
Sure.
primarily, that's all I can say. I have that response to the question.
Great.
Thank you.
How did you find them, by the way?
Patricia Carvajales.
Oh, okay.
I was talking to her a lot, and she was the one who gave me the idea, why don't we make a story map for your entire dissertation? I'm like, yes, let's do that.
Yeah. And she's really enthusiastic too.
She contacted them, and we basically set up meetings, so I started working with them. She was the one who, like, you should be working with them in Providence because they have excellent skills in story maps and other GIS applications. It would be great for you. And both of them are really understanding. Like, there were moments sometimes Providence would be, no, we should do this way. And then we were like, no, it's her vision, we can't. They were like, awesome. But they were really supportive. They've been like messaging me yesterday, like, they were both great, yeah. But I mean, they're graduating, but I'm sure there are others, like, amazing people over there. But I was lucky to work with them on this project, really, really lucky.
Can you show us the crowdsourcing? How do you contribute?
Oh, it's really, I mean, basically, just participate.
You had tried a wiki before that was a sort of,
Oh, okay. My failed attempts.
well, I didn't mean to say it failed, but
Your first attempt.
it morphed into this, and so it looks a lot simpler to be able to contribute. And so,
And it's a map, and they were like, I was talking to them, I don't know if that this could be done. They're like, yeah, crowdsourcing. I'm like, I don't know, don't judge me. But this is basically like, you click participate, you can upload a picture, enter a title, like put a link, you can like pin it on the map if you want it to be in a certain location, which I hope like that's kind of really important because I want information to be visualized. You can put like description, just give the right link, and then like I said, terms and submit, and just And I love the fact that it's easy. The wiki was kind of complicated, and that story is kind of weird because it got hacked, and there was like 1,000, because it was open access and it got hacked, and there were like 1,000 hemorrhoid commercial pages attached to it.
Oh my.
I'm like, could you say it was a pain in your hair?
And Nathan Riggs, who is also a fourth year in our program, he helped me set it up. It was under his account. And I was talking to him like, you can like delete all of them, but you have to delete it one by one. That'll probably take a lot of time. You might want to do something else. I'm like, yeah, definitely.
It's a great story though.
Yes, that was, yeah. And then like I used social media. I tried to use social media, and it's just like you get responses. People like certain things, reshare, but not necessarily comments, which is something that I actually want to write about. Why there was no or posting anything in there. I know like a couple of people that I talked to that I know who like the page and following. One of the things that they told me, actually Susan Garza, she was like, I don't know what to post. Like, I don't want to post something that I'm not supposed to. That's kind of like, I don't know what to call it, but maybe like the fear of saying something that will not be proper, and that's something I actually want to write about, like those failed attempts. I really want to go back to it and talk about why in the context of Middle East, and hopefully I will be able to, by doing more research on social media use for these kind of justice projects to see if there are any other similar failed attempts on why it happened, how it happened.
I might mention you might want to put like some kind of prompt, a writing prompt. For example, years ago there was 20 years ago there was a Trace TRACE writing project in the UK that I was part of, and they had this early web page, and it was called the Noon Quilt, and they invited people from all over the world to post a picture and just a description of where they were at noon on that day.
Okay.
And they created this quilt, and they were clickable, all the sections of the quilt. And it got so big they had to make a second noon quilt. And, but it had a prompt. In other words, a sort of idea of just posting something on what you were doing at that time and where you were, kind of
Yeah,
thing.
that's, they put this together, like they added the crowdsourcing on Sunday. It's just really.
But you could, maybe do something in relation to the prompt having to do with social justice or something. It could be whatever you want it to be, but maybe that would help the participation level.
Okay.
Is if there's some added, just
Mhm.
a prompt.
Yes, absolutely.
That's an idea.
That was all like something that I was also thinking about to incorporate like in here, and also.
Any last question or comment? Thank you, Etta. And we're
Thank
going to
you.
let the public. There are refreshments here. Take some with you. We'll take a quick break. Just a quick break. Thank you so much for bringing this.
I have some friends.
Absolutely.
Great.
The